I hadn't seen the town in over 15 years. Red Hollow looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe that's what time does. It shrinks things. Makes the monsters in your childhood closet seem ridiculous. Makes you think the whispers in the attic were just the wind. That's what I told myself, anyway. Until I came back. The drive-in was quiet. Too quiet. My phone had lost signal an hour ago, and the road turned to cracked stone and gravel as I got closer. Trees leaned over the road like they wanted to hide it. Their branches scratched against my windshield as if trying to stop me. The air smelled like wet dirt and something faintly metallic. I rolled the window down for a moment, hoping for fresh air, but it only made me feel sicker. There was a heaviness in the wind, like it had a weight. A memory. A warning. The house stood at the end of a long dirt path, tucked between two dead trees and a rusted gate that hung open like a broken jaw. My grandfather's house, what was left of it, looked like it had been swallowed by the forest. Ivy climbed up the stone walls. The roof sagged in the middle. The windows were dark, mirrors for ghosts. I parked and sat in the car for a while. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. I stared at the house, half expecting to see someone standing in the window. I didn't. When I finally stepped out, the gravel crunched under my boots. Every step felt like I was walking into something I shouldn't. I pulled my coat tighter around me, even though it wasn't cold. Just wrong. Inside, the air was stale. Dust hung in the sunlight like ash. The wooden floors creaked under my weight, groaning with every step. Old furniture was covered in white sheets, like bodies laid out for burial. I didn't want to lift them. My grandfather had died in this house. Alone. That's all I was told. He'd locked himself in for weeks before the neighbors noticed the smell. When they broke in, they found him sitting upright in his armchair, eyes open, mouth shut tight like he was hiding a secret. I never came to the funeral. I was 12. Too scared, too confused. And my mom, his daughter, had already moved far away from this place, wanting nothing to do with it. Now she was gone too. Cancer. Quick and cruel. And here I was, back where it all started. The lawyer had mailed me a key, a deed, and a letter that simply read, "You need to see what he left behind." So here I was. I wandered through the house, flipping light switches that didn't work, brushing past cobwebs, and avoiding my reflection in the mirrors. I wasn't ready to see myself here yet. Not in this place. In the back room, the smell was worse. The floorboards felt uneven, like something beneath was shifting. I found the attic stairs, old pull-down steps with a cord that felt too warm in my hand. I tugged it. The stairs creaked open with a sigh, as if the house knew I was coming. I stared up into the dark for a long time. Something was waiting up there. I could feel it, and against every part of me that said don't, I climbed. Because the truth is, I had to know why he warned us. Why the journal, his final message, had been hidden where no one would find it. I had to know what happened during the last blood moon, and why he was so afraid of it coming again. The attic groaned like something alive as I pulled down the ladder. A thick layer of dust greeted me, dancing in the slant of afternoon sunlight. I hadn't been up here in years. Not since I was a child. Not since Grandpa was alive. Back then, this attic was forbidden. Grandpa used to say, "Some doors stay shut for a reason, Johnny." I never understood why a dusty room full of junk needed warnings. But today, something about the air felt tight, like the house was holding its breath. The boards creaked beneath me as I climbed. The smell of old wood, mothballs, and something metallic, almost like dried blood, hung in the stillness. I scanned the room. Boxes, old furniture, broken picture frames. Nothing strange, really. But I felt drawn to the far corner, where a thick canvas was draped over something heavy. I pulled the cloth away. A wooden chest sat quietly in the dark. Dark mahogany, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Not decorative ones. These looked like warnings. Circles inside triangles, lines that ended in jagged hooks. The lock was ancient and rusted, but the moment I touched it, it clicked open. I hesitated. My pulse thudded in my ears. Part of me wanted to leave it alone. But I didn't. Inside was a journal, wrapped in aged leather, its corners worn and cracked. Beside it lay a silver key on a black cord, and a small bundle of dried herbs I couldn't identify. Everything smelled of smoke and something sweet, like old incense. I took the journal out and flipped it open. The first page was blank. The second, ink-stained, smudged, held a date, October 17th, 1973. Then words, in my grandfather's sharp handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I failed. The door is waking again. She knows the moon is near." The hairs on my arms stood up. Each page pulled me deeper into a version of Grandpa I never knew. He wrote of strange dreams, of a woman with black eyes who spoke from behind mirrors, of finding dead birds arranged in spirals on the porch, of hearing whispers beneath the floorboards, always when the moon turned red. He called it the blood moon ritual. I kept reading. My hands began to tremble. The entries grew darker, the handwriting more frantic. Maxie came to the door again. She didn't knock, just stood there watching. Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. The red door must never open. My blood sealed it, but it's weakening. It wants a vessel. The next page was soaked in something brown. Dried blood? I told myself it was rust. In the center of that page was a sketch. A door buried beneath tree roots, surrounded by 13 symbols. My breath caught. One of those symbols, I'd seen it before, scratched into the bark of the pine tree near the well. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty attic. Still I felt eyes. In the final entry, the handwriting was barely legible. I can hear it now, calling through the walls. The blood moon returns in 5 nights. If I can't stop it, someone must. John, forgive me. The journal slipped from my hands and landed with a heavy thud. I sat back, breathless. The silence in the attic grew heavier. The floorboards below creaked, not from me. From somewhere else in the house. Something was awake, and it had been waiting. I picked up the journal, the key, and the herbs. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the storm, it never came. The sky stayed still, heavy with silence, as if something had swallowed the thunder. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears like a hand over your mouth. The journal lay open beside me on the dusty bed, the lamp casting a dull amber glow over the ink-stained pages. I had read it twice already, and still it made no sense. My grandfather wrote like a man trying to fight off madness with words. She waits where the trees bleed. Do not listen to her voice under the red sky. The door is buried, but it remembers. I didn't know what any of it meant. But something deep in my gut, some ancient instinct maybe, was whispering that I was already too close to whatever he feared. Around midnight, I heard the creak. It came from the hallway, slow and deliberate, like someone had stepped on the loose floorboard outside my room. I froze. I wasn't expecting visitors. I hadn't told anyone I was staying here, not even the few people I still trusted back in Chicago. The house was old, sure, and old houses make sounds. But this one wasn't the usual pop of aging wood or scurry of a mouse in the walls. This was heavy, measured, human. I grabbed the flashlight from my backpack and stepped into the hallway. The beam cut through the dark, revealing the peeling wallpaper and dust-smeared portraits that lined the corridor. The smell of damp wood and something else, like copper, hung in the air. No one was there, but the air felt wrong, like it had just been stirred by something unseen. I turned toward the stairs to head back when I noticed it. A mark, carved into the wood of the hallway wall, just above the baseboard. 3 vertical lines slashed through by a 4th. Jagged and deep, as if someone had scratched it with a knife or claws. I knelt down to look closer. Fresh. The wood around it was raw and splintered. It was the same symbol I had seen in the journal. I stepped back. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. Something moved outside the window. Just a flicker, but enough to make me whip around. I pulled the curtain aside and stared into the yard. The pines stood tall and still in the moonlight, their branches like skeletal arms frozen in prayer. And then between 2 trunks, I saw it. A shape. Tall, thin, not moving. Watching. I leaned closer, squinting. But by the time I blinked, it was gone. I stood there for a while, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. But the trees stayed silent. That's when the whisper came. Not from the house. Not from outside. From the journal. A dry hiss, like breath escaping old lungs. I turned slowly and walked back into the room. The journal's pages had turned. On their own. And on the blank page, words had appeared. You looked. She saw. My throat went dry. I slammed the journal shut. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep that night, and when morning finally came, I found the same symbol carved onto a tree in the woods behind the house. This time it was bleeding. Just a trickle, dark and slow. I reached out to touch it, just to see if it was real. It was warm. Too warm. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was all in my head. Something was watching. Something knew I was here. And it had already started. Morning came with a low mist curling over the fields, thick like the breath of something sleeping just beneath the earth. I hadn't slept much. The journal sat open on the desk beside my bed, its brittle pages rustling without wind. It had been doing that since last night, fluttering like a nervous bird. My grandfather's words from the last entry rang in my head. The blood moon returns. I hear the voice again. She's waiting. I needed answers. I drove into the heart of Red Hollow, a crooked little town that looked like it had been preserved in a jar and forgotten on a dusty shelf. The buildings leaned into the streets like they had secrets to whisper. Storefronts were faded, and the townsfolk walked as if they were made of wax and glass. Eyes shifted away when I passed. Conversations died mid-sentence. I parked outside the Old Town Archive, a squat brick building with ivy crawling across its face like veins. Inside, it smelled of yellowed paper and mold. An old woman at the front desk barely looked up. I'm looking for any news articles or town records about past blood moons. Disappearances maybe, I said. Her eyes met mine, clouded and pale, and something in her expression flickered. We don't keep records of nonsense, she muttered. But my grandfather, Elias Halloway. Her lips pressed tight like a wound being sealed. That man brought darkness into this town. Best let the dead stay dead. She turned her attention back to her knitting. Thread. Red. I didn't even realize the color until it slipped through her fingers like a thin river of blood. I left without a single document. Across the road sat a diner, Marge's Place. The kind of spot where the pancakes are thick and the coffee bitter. I needed something hot and some time to think. As I pushed through the door, a bell chimed and 4 heads turned to stare at me. All old. All silent. One man's fork hung halfway to his mouth. I sat in the corner booth. The waitress came over. Her name tag said Helen, and she looked like she'd seen every bad day Red Hollow had to offer. Coffee, she asked. Yeah. And you knew my grandfather, didn't you? She stiffened but poured the coffee. Everyone knew Elias, she said finally. He warned us over and over. Said the land was cursed. Said the moon spoke to him. People thought he was losing it. Maybe he was. Do you think he was wrong? Helen didn't answer. She just stared past me, her face pale. She's watching you now, you know, she said, almost in a whisper. Maxie. My skin prickled. You know her? Helen nodded once. Don't trust her voice. She makes you see what you want to believe. The closer the blood moon comes, the sweeter her lies get. Your grandfather, he saw through it too late. She leaned in close, breath smelling faintly of cigarettes and peppermint. Whatever's in that journal of his, you better finish reading it. Before she finishes you. She straightened and walked away like she hadn't just poured ice down my spine. Outside the diner, the wind picked up. Leaves circled like they were caught in some unseen pattern, forming shapes, then unraveling. Across the street, someone stood in the alley. A woman. Red scarf. Black coat. Eyes like smoke. She smiled slowly and lifted her hand in a gentle wave. Maxie. And I waved back. I didn't know why. Like something inside me moved before I told it to. Like my bones remembered her even if my mind didn't. She turned and vanished into the fog. And I stood there, in the center of Red Hollow, with the distinct feeling that nothing here was pretending. No, they all knew exactly what they were doing. Only I was pretending. Pretending I could leave. Pretending I still had a choice. I didn't sleep that night. Even with the windows shut, I could hear something scratching. Not like mice or raccoons, the kind of scratching that follows a rhythm. Like someone trying to remember a song on the other side of the wall. When the sun finally came up, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the journal. I hadn't opened it again since I saw that fresh ink, my grandfather's warning written long after he was buried. I didn't want to look at it, not because I didn't believe it anymore, but because I did. But that morning, something pushed me. Maybe it was the silence of the house, the way it felt like it was holding its breath. I opened the journal. The ink had dried, but the message was still there. The page was soft at the corners, yellowing. Beneath the last entry was a strange drawing. A tree, crooked and wide, with roots stretching far beneath the ground. Underneath that was a single line, scrawled hastily. The altar lives beneath her roots. When the red sky bleeds, it opens. At the bottom corner was something new. A small map, roughly sketched. The hills behind the house, the rusted windmill, and a red X, under a large tree drawn with thick, angry lines. I left the house without breakfast. I needed to know if the tree was real. The woods behind my grandfather's property had always made me uneasy as a kid. I remember once wandering in too far, only to find a deer lying dead and torn open, but there were no predators around. Just the sound of buzzing flies and a stillness that didn't feel natural. I hadn't stepped foot in those woods since. Now I was pushing branches aside, walking deeper, following a map drawn by a man who may have lost his mind, or seen something that drove him there. After half an hour of walking, I found it. The tree. It stood alone, far taller than any of the others. Its bark was blackened like it had been burned a long time ago, but no fire could have reached this deep into the woods. Its limbs were gnarled and twisted, like dozens of arms reaching out for something just out of reach. And then there were the roots. They broke the ground like snakes, thick and tangled, gripping the earth so tight the soil around them cracked. In the center there was a hollow, an opening just large enough for someone to crawl inside. I knelt, and a gust of cold air blew out from the hollow, carrying a scent like rust and wet stone. It didn't feel natural. My skin prickled. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. I pulled out my flashlight, clicked it on, and crawled in. The passage dipped down, roots pressing against the walls like ribs of some giant creature. I crawled for what felt like forever, until suddenly I dropped. Not far, maybe 4 feet, but enough to knock the wind out of me. When I stood and looked around, my light caught something carved into the stone wall. A circle, lined with jagged runes. And below it, an altar. It wasn't made of stone, but something darker. It gleamed like it was wet, though the air around it was dry as bone. I stepped closer and saw that it was covered in symbols, matching the ones from the journal. Some of them pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. The journal hadn't lied. This place, whatever it was real. There were bones scattered around the altar. Animal, maybe. But some were longer than they should have been. I told myself they were from deer or cattle, not people. Not children. I didn't believe it. I reached out and touched the edge of the altar. My fingers burned instantly, and I pulled back, breath hitching. But there was no mark. No wound. Just that same, deep cold. Then I heard it. A whisper. It came from the altar. From the walls. From the roots above me. It wasn't in English. I didn't understand it, but I felt it. Like the words were pressing against my brain, carving themselves in. I stumbled back, heart racing. My flashlight flickered. The whispering grew louder. And then silence. Just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I didn't run. I crawled back the way I came, dirt in my mouth, roots scraping my arms. The light flickered again but held. When I reached the surface, the sky had darkened. A storm was rolling in, fast and red. I stood at the base of the tree, heart pounding. The altar was real. The journal was telling the truth. And something under that tree was awake. I didn't sleep much after finding the red door. Even when I closed my eyes, the darkness behind my lids pulsed with the same dull red that glowed from the markings in the woods. I could still feel the damp air clinging to my skin, smell the moss, and hear the quiet hum of something breathing beneath the earth. That night, the journal was louder. Not literally, of course, but it felt alive. Every time I looked at it, resting on the crooked desk near my bed, I felt it watching me. The leather cover was no longer just old. It was waiting. The air around it seemed heavier, like it was sucking the warmth out of the room. I tried to ignore it, but something about the mirror across from the bed kept pulling at my attention. It was an old thing, oval-shaped with a wooden frame that was chipped and warped with time. I don't even remember bringing it from the attic. Maybe my grandfather had placed it there years ago. Maybe it was always there. I don't know. What I do know is that the reflection I saw tonight wasn't quite mine. At first glance, it looked like me. Same brown eyes, same tired face, same mussed-up hair from a restless night. But when I turned my head slightly to the left, the reflection turned slightly to the right. Just a little. Just enough for my stomach to tighten. I laughed nervously. Blinked. And it blinked a second too late. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling under the weight of something I couldn't name. I moved toward the mirror, every step creaking louder than it should have. When I reached it, I stared at myself, my not self, and tried to breathe normally. "Okay, John," I whispered. "You're just tired." But then it smiled. Wide. Way too wide. My heart nearly stopped. I didn't smile. I didn't even move. And yet there it was, my reflection, grinning like it had been waiting for me to notice it all along. I stumbled back, bumping into the desk. The journal fell open on its own. Pages flipped furiously like caught in a storm. Then they stopped. One page. Fresh ink, still wet, written in handwriting that looked almost like mine but shakier. "Don't trust the mirror. He is the first gate." I stared at the words, cold sweat dripping down my spine. I could hear something behind me, like a soft scraping sound. I turned. The reflection hadn't moved. It just stood there, head slightly tilted, smiling. I slammed the journal shut and threw a cloth over the mirror. I didn't care if I looked insane. Whatever it was, whoever it was looking back at me, it wasn't me. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to gather my thoughts. I had come to Red Hollow thinking I'd clean out a dusty old house and sell it. Nothing more. Now I was covering mirrors, reading ghostly messages, and dreaming in blood and roots. But something deeper was unraveling, I could feel it. I reached for the journal again, hands trembling. I turned a few pages back to where the old ink had faded. My grandfather's voice echoed from those words, even though he was long gone. When the mirror smiles first, the veil has thinned. I closed the book, my breath catching in my throat. There was no denying it anymore. This wasn't just a bad dream or a case of nerves. Something in Red Hollow had seen me. Something had been waiting for me. And now that I had found the door, it wanted me to open it. And it wasn't going to wait much longer. The air outside had a different weight that night. Heavy. Still. Even the wind didn't dare move. I stood at the edge of the forest, just behind my grandfather's overgrown garden, the journal clenched in my hand like a talisman. The moon hung low, glowing red like a slit eye watching everything. That damned blood moon. Just like the one in the final pages of the journal. I had seen her. Maxie. She left the diner just before midnight, dressed in black, face covered with a lace veil. She walked with purpose, not once looking back. Something about her steps felt unnatural, measured, rehearsed. Like her feet already knew the way through the woods. I followed her. At first, the path was faint, just a trail of bent grass and broken twigs, but soon the forest swallowed everything. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No crickets. No wind. Just my own breathing, sharp and nervous. Then I heard it. A low hum. Not music exactly, more like dozens of voices murmuring the same sound, vibrating the ground. I crouched behind a fallen tree, peering through a thicket of dead branches. And there they were. A circle of people, cloaked in deep red robes, standing around a sunken stone altar. Some held torches. Others held something worse, bones, feathers, jars filled with dark liquid that pulsed when the firelight touched them. Maxie stood at the center. She had removed her veil. Her face was pale and still, lips painted the same color as the moon. But her eyes weren't right. They weren't eyes. They were empty sockets, black as ink, and yet I could feel them staring into me. She spoke in a language I'd never heard before. Harsh, broken, like gravel grinding inside a throat. The cult responded in unison. The fire flared brighter. And that's when they brought it out. A goat, alive, shaking, eyes wild. Two robed figures held it down on the altar. Maxie raised a curved blade that shimmered with red symbols. One word from her lips, and the blade dropped. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I just stood there, trembling, as the blood ran down the sides of the stone and into the roots that pulsed beneath it. Roots like veins, like something was drinking. Suddenly, every head turned at once. All of them. Toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart thrashed in my chest like it wanted to escape without me. Maxie smiled. And that was somehow worse than the blade, worse than the blood. It was a calm smile. A knowing smile. She didn't seem surprised at all. Her lips didn't move, but her voice whispered in my head. We've been waiting for you, John. The red moon brightened until it nearly turned white, and the shadows around the altar stretched like claws. I stumbled back. Twigs snapped under my boots. The whisper again, closer this time. Come. Join your family. I ran. Branches scraped my face. Thorns tore at my jacket. I didn't care. I just ran, until the voices were behind me, and the only sound was my own panicked breathing. Back at the house, I locked the doors, boarded the windows, and sank to the floor with the journal open in front of me. On a page I hadn't seen before, fresh ink bled through. The red door opens only for blood. My hands were shaking. The journal knew. It always knew. They weren't performing a ritual. They were preparing for something. And I had just been invited. The wind outside howled like it was mourning something long dead. I sat by the oil lamp in the study, the journal open in front of me, its yellowed pages trembling from the draft sneaking under the door. I hadn't slept since the night in the woods. Not properly, at least. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the circle of cloaked figures and Maxie's hollow stare. Those eyes that weren't really eyes. I flipped through the journal again. There were notes I hadn't seen before. Not just inked words, but jagged scrawls written over older entries. As if someone had tried to rewrite history, or scream through the paper. Then I found it. It was a page tucked between the cover and the binding. Folded so tight it had nearly fused with the leather. I pried it out with shaking fingers. It wasn't my grandfather's handwriting. It was my father's. The top of the page read, "If I die, know this was not madness, it was mercy." The rest was a mess of frantic sentences, as if he wrote it while looking over his shoulder. We tried to stop the ritual in '82. I thought sealing the altar was enough. It wasn't. The roots grow back. The whispers return. Your grandfather used blood to bind the door, his blood. That's why it obeyed him. That's why they fear the name Holloway. I leaned back in the chair. My lungs felt tight, like the room was shrinking. My father hadn't killed himself. They killed him because he was trying to end it. And now I was next in line. I stood and paced the room. Everything inside me wanted to run, leave the house, the town, drive until the road ended, and then keep walking. But it wouldn't matter. The journal wouldn't let me. The thing beneath the earth wouldn't let me. I was part of this, whether I wanted to be or not. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my Aunt Margaret, the only other person who knew anything about what happened in Red Hollow back then. She answered after 4 rings. Her voice was dry like leaves in winter. "John, I wondered when you'd call. You knew?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You knew what they did to Dad?" A long silence. Then, I begged him not to come back here. He thought he could finish what your grandfather started. He wasn't strong enough. I gripped the receiver until my knuckles ached. And me? Am I supposed to finish it now? Another pause. You're not supposed to finish it. You're supposed to survive it. Before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, heart pounding in my ears. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then out. The house was swallowed in darkness. From the floor above, a slow creak of footsteps echoed down the stairwell. But I was alone in the house. Wasn't I? I grabbed the journal and backed into the hallway. The air was heavy, and it smelled like burning cedar. Another step, heavier this time. I looked up toward the stairs, barely able to make out the shape. A figure. Standing. Watching. Then, in a voice like crackling firewood, it spoke. "You carry his blood, John. And blood remembers." The figure vanished before I could scream. And behind me, on the hallway mirror, the words appeared in dripping red. "You are Cale Wakes. You cannot run from your name." That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, watching the moon rise, and wondering how deep the roots of this nightmare went. I always thought the phrase, "the calm before the storm," was just poetic nonsense. But that evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and Red Hollow sank into silence, I understood it completely. Everything was too quiet. Even the trees had stopped rustling, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The air had a thickness to it, like something heavy was about to descend. I stood at the edge of the field behind the house, holding my grandfather's journal tight against my chest. The pages felt warm, alive. They pulsed gently under my fingers, like a heartbeat not my own. Over the past few days, the entries had changed. I don't mean the ones written by my grandfather. I mean the ones that hadn't been there before. Fresh ink in a handwriting I didn't recognize, but it seemed to know me. One line kept repeating. "The door remembers. The door remembers. The door remembers." And then this, written just before nightfall. "The blood moon rises. Descend, John. Face what your blood began." I should have run. I should have burned the journal and left Red Hollow behind. But fear doesn't always make you turn back. Sometimes it drags you deeper. I went down into the basement. The old boards creaked beneath me, groaning like they knew I wasn't coming back. I had stared at that wall for hours the night before, tracing the edges of the map my grandfather drew. The hidden passage was behind the coal bin. He said so in the journal. I moved it aside. Dust exploded into the air. Behind it, stone. A door, smooth and red as dried blood. No knob. No hinges. But as I placed my palm on the center, the stone rippled beneath my skin like warm wax. It opened. Behind the door was a narrow tunnel that twisted downward like the throat of some ancient beast. The walls were damp and covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly red. They looked like eyes, watching me from every angle. I kept walking. The deeper I went, the louder the sound grew. Not footsteps. Not echoes. Breathing. Heavy, slow breathing, like a creature asleep in the dark. I tried not to panic. I tried to keep my thoughts quiet. The passage opened into a wide crypt. My breath caught. The ceiling arched high above me, carved with symbols I couldn't begin to understand. Stone pillars stood crooked like broken teeth. In the center was the altar, exactly as my grandfather had described it, caked in wax, dried blood, and twisted offerings. Bones. Dolls. Things I couldn't name. And behind the altar stood Maxie. She wasn't alone. Cloaked figures formed a circle around her, heads bowed, arms lifted to the ceiling. They were chanting. The words made no sense, but they slithered into my ears and wrapped around my spine. Maxie looked at me and smiled. Not like someone greeting an old friend. More like someone watching a flower bloom after years of waiting. "You came," she whispered, just as the blood intended. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "What are you?" "I'm what your grandfather feared. I'm what he tried to bury. But he didn't bury it deep enough." She stepped closer, and her eyes, they weren't eyes anymore. Just voids, like twin wounds in her skull. "You are the lock. You are the key. You are the final breath before the scream." The cult's chanting grew louder. My legs shook. The journal in my hand burned. I dropped it, but it didn't fall. It hovered in midair, pages flapping as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. I took a step back. "Where are the townspeople?" I asked. "Why is no one stopping this?" "They are here," Maxie said softly. "All of them. You're standing on their silence." I looked down. The floor was bones. Hundreds, maybe thousands, fused together into the shape of the crypt. Skulls grinned up at me. Femurs lined the walls. Every person who had vanished during the blood moon over the years. They hadn't just disappeared. They had become part of the altar. "You can still serve," Maxie said. "You can open the way. The old one is waiting. He listens when your blood calls. Don't you feel it, John? The pulse beneath your feet." And I did. God help me, I did. The floor vibrated with a heartbeat that matched my own. The blood moon had risen outside. I knew it, even without seeing the sky. I could feel its gaze pressing down through the earth. Maxie raised her hands. The cult followed. The journal flipped to a final page. One more passage. One last verse. My grandfather had written it in blood. "To seal the wound, a wound must bleed. To close the eye, one must see. Speak the name. Spill the key. Or all will drown beneath the tree." And just below it, in shaky ink, "Forgive me, John. I couldn't do it. But maybe you can." The altar began to crack open. Something beneath it was waking. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I didn't have much time left. I couldn't feel my legs as I stumbled deeper into the crypt. The air was thick, like breathing through wet cloth. The red glow from the journal in my hands pulsed with a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. Behind me, the tunnel rumbled. Dirt fell from the ceiling like rain from a dying sky. I kept going. The staircase curved downward, carved straight from stone, slick with moss and old blood. The deeper I went, the louder the chant became. A rhythm of words not meant for human tongues. They slithered through the air, curling into my ears, scraping against my thoughts. Then I saw them. Dozens of figures in cloaks, surrounding a massive circular pit. Their faces were hidden, but I knew they were watching me. Waiting. The walls of the pit were carved with hundreds of symbols, some matching those from the journal, others older, stranger. And at the center of it all, on a raised stone altar, stood Maxie. She wasn't hiding anymore. Her cloak had fallen. Her skin looked like cracked porcelain, laced with dark red veins that glowed beneath the surface. Her eyes, God help me, her eyes weren't eyes at all. Just hollow sockets leaking smoke that rose like incense. "John," she said, her voice a whisper and a roar at the same time. "You've made it." Just as he did. I knew she meant my grandfather. I didn't answer. My hands were trembling, but I kept the journal open. I could feel its warmth pressing against my skin. Page after page filled itself in real time, the ink forming words I'd never seen before. The instructions. The last ritual. Maxie stepped down from the altar slowly, like a queen descending from a throne. "You've always been meant for this," she said. "Born under the waning moon. Marked by old blood. Your grandfather failed, but you could bring him forth." The cultists raised their hands and began to chant again. Louder. Faster. The ground shook. From the pit, something began to rise. At first, it was just mist. But then a shape. Enormous. Shadowed. I saw a spine like broken mountains and limbs that moved like smoke and bone. The smell of sulfur filled the crypt. My knees buckled. Maxie reached out her hand. "Let go, John. Let him in." But I didn't move. I looked down at the journal. One sentence glowed brighter than all the others. "The blood of the marked must seal the mouth of the beast." I understood then. It was never about stopping the ritual from outside. It had to be done from within. My hands moved on their own. I tore a page from the journal and pressed it against my chest. The paper burned into my skin, and I screamed as the glyph carved itself into my flesh. The altar cracked. The pit howled. "No!" Maxie shrieked. She lunged at me, her arms stretched out like branches twisted in pain. Her nails dug into my shoulder as I staggered back onto the altar. But I kept chanting. I don't know how I knew the words. They poured out of me like they'd been waiting all along. The pit began to collapse inward, sucking in the fog, the cult, the light, the air. Maxie clawed at me, her body breaking apart into ash and bone, but she wouldn't stop. I used the last ounce of strength I had and slammed my hand, marked and burning, onto the altar's center. The glyph flared with blinding red light. Then silence. A heavy, impossible silence. Maxie was gone. The pit sealed. The cultists vanished like dust in wind. I collapsed on the altar, breath shallow. The journal fell from my hand, closing on its own. Everything was cold. I thought of my grandfather. I wondered if he'd been proud, or if he'd just been scared like I was. I let my eyes close. Above me, somewhere far beyond the stone and soil, the blood moon was still shining. I don't remember falling. 1 second, I was holding the journal, screaming the words I barely understood, ancient syllables that felt like fire in my throat, and the next, I was on the cold stone floor of the crypt, blood running from my side. The wound throbbed with every heartbeat. Maxie stood over me, her knife slick with my blood, her face no longer human. Her skin, if you could still call it that, peeled and rippled like wax held too close to a flame. Her eyes were hollow voids, bleeding shadow. She wasn't hiding anymore. She didn't need to. The blood moon had risen, and the veil between our world and whatever lay beneath it was paper thin. "You were supposed to surrender," she said, tilting her head. Her voice was layered, hers and something else beneath it, something older. My hand fumbled for the journal. Pages fluttered wildly, as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. The writing had changed again. My grandfather's handwriting was gone. In its place, blood-red ink that pulsed like a heartbeat. "You are the seal." The words burned into my eyes. I didn't know what it meant until I felt it, something deep in my chest, like a string being pulled tight. My veins burned. My blood wasn't mine anymore. It was waking something, feeding it. I tried to crawl, dragging myself toward the altar in the center of the room. Around me, the cult chanted louder, circling in a frenzy. Their hoods fell back one by one, revealing faces twisted with devotion and rot. Some of them had no mouths. Others had too many. Maxie laughed. It echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the stone walls like it had nowhere else to go. "You're just like your grandfather. He bled in this room too. He begged. You won't even get the chance." She raised the knife again. But this time I was ready. The journal had told me what to do, even if I didn't fully understand it. My hand, sticky with blood, pressed against the glyph carved into the altar, the one I'd only seen in dreams until now. It lit up the moment I touched it. Bright red. Alive. A sound ripped through the air, something like a scream, but deeper, more primal. The kind of noise that didn't come from any living creature. The walls pulsed. The floor cracked. And the cult, they froze. Maxie hissed. "No! It's too early." The glyph expanded, light pouring from its cracks like a dam breaking. My body lifted from the ground, weightless and burning. My blood poured freely now, not from the wound, but from everywhere. Nose, mouth, eyes. It was the price. I knew that. Somewhere deep inside, I understood. The air thickened. The shadows recoiled. A blinding red light erupted from the altar, slamming into Maxie. She screamed, not in fear, but rage, as the skin melted from her form. Bones cracked and twisted. She tried to crawl away, her voice now a mix of dozens, men, women, children, beasts, screaming through her mouth. I spoke the final line of the ritual. It wasn't English. I don't know what it was. But it felt like closing a door that had been left open for far too long. And then everything went silent. Not quiet, silent. Like sound itself had been swallowed. The cult lay still. Their bodies weren't burned. Just emptied. Like puppets with their strings cut. Maxie's form dissolved into black ash, caught in a windless current that carried her through the broken door and into nothing. The blood moon above the crypt cracked like glass. I saw it, through the broken ceiling, through the burning in my eyes, splitting into pieces that rained down like dying embers. I fell, not just onto the floor, but through something deeper. My body gave out. I couldn't feel my limbs, couldn't even breathe properly. But I felt peace, cold, distant peace, like I had done what I was meant to do. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing open beside me. And on the last page, something was written, not in blood this time, but in soft black ink. He did not listen, but he remembered. My vision faded, and the last thing I saw was the altar glowing faintly, waiting. Because evil doesn't die. It waits. And blood remembers. The smell of burnt blood still clung to the back of my throat. I don't remember how I got outside. 1 minute I was in the crypt, staring into Maxie's black, lidless eyes. The next, there was only cold. A darkness so thick it wasn't just absence of light, it was a weight pressing down on my bones. I had done it, I think. I sealed the glyph. I gave my blood. I spoke the words the journal demanded. But if I died down there, who's speaking now? Maybe I'm what's left of John Halloway. Maybe I'm the echo of a man who thought he could stop something ancient with ink, whispers, and fear. They say they found my body near the altar. My throat torn open, but my eyes wide, as if I saw something before the end. They buried me next to my grandfather. No one came to the funeral, except the gravedigger and a man in a gray coat who left before the last shovel of dirt hit the casket. Red Hollow went quiet after that. For a while anyway. The fog lifted. The air smelled normal again. No more whispers at night. No more crows circling the church steeple. The townspeople opened their shops. Smiles returned, though none reached the eyes. The newspaper wrote it off as a tragic mental breakdown. They said I imagined it all. They said I wandered into the woods alone, probably disturbed by family trauma. They burned my grandfather's house to the ground, said it was unsafe. But they didn't find the journal. Because it's not where they think it is. It's waiting. Some say a child found it near the old graveyard last week. A girl with red boots and a loose braid. They say she walked home holding it tight, like a secret she didn't even know she was keeping. They say she's been drawing symbols in chalk on the schoolyard pavement, circles inside circles, a key, a door. Her parents think it's just imagination. But I know better. Because I see her. Every night. From wherever I am now, this limbo, this nowhere place, I see her open the journal. I see new pages appear, words forming without a pen. I see my handwriting, but I'm not the one writing. The voice that once spoke to me now speaks to her. Softer. Patient. Feeding her dreams with images she won't understand until it's too late. She doesn't hear the warnings. She only feels the pull. I screamed from beyond once. I tried. But the dead can't stop the tide. The blood moon comes again. Not tomorrow. Not next month. But soon enough. And when it does, the red door will open again. Maxie? She's not gone. She doesn't die like we do. She sleeps. She waits in the cracks, behind reflections, inside stories whispered in sleep. You want to know what's worse than dying? Knowing it didn't end with me. Knowing that journal is still out there, hungry for hands to open it. It's not over. Not even close. The ritual was only paused. And she's already writing the next chapter.